I faked my own death to escape my family, but now I'm back to ruin everything they took from me. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and let's get into this wild story. It all started one night, when I finally realized there was no way out. My family had never understood me. Not really. I was always the odd one, the outcast, the disappointment. No matter how much I achieved, it was never enough. My parents were too busy with their careers to care. My siblings were too absorbed in their perfect little worlds to notice me. The love I craved never came, but the expectations? Those were always there, growing heavier by the year. When I was 18, I made my first real attempt to escape. I left home for college, hoping to find something resembling peace and freedom. But the moment I stepped into the adult world, the pressure intensified. I was constantly reminded of who I was supposed to be, of what I was supposed to achieve, and I could feel the suffocation getting worse. It wasn't just my family's expectations anymore. It was my own fear of failing them. I thought moving to a new city would change things. But instead, I found myself more isolated than ever, trapped in a cycle of disappointment and self-loathing. My parents called regularly, pushing their dreams onto me, telling me how to live my life, who to be friends with, what career path to take. It felt like there was no room for me to breathe, no space for me to live for myself. I couldn't take it anymore. One day, I sat in my cramped apartment, my hands shaking, the phone in my lap, staring at the screen. My parents had just called again, demanding answers about my future. It was the same conversation we had every few weeks. And for the first time, something inside me snapped. I knew I had to leave. I couldn't just walk away from everything. I had to disappear. I had to be free, truly free. That night, I made the decision. I faked my own death. The plan wasn't complicated, but it required precision. I knew I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't just leave a note and disappear. That would have been too easy, and I would have never been able to escape. No, I needed to make them believe I was gone forever. I sold most of my belongings, packed a few things in a bag, and booked a one-way ticket to a foreign country, somewhere where no one knew my name. No one cared who I was. I set up a few emails to make it look like I was still alive, checking in every once in a while. But the real trick was the fake obituary. I hired a small service to create a death notice in the local paper, making it seem like I had been killed in a car accident. I made sure it was vague, no real details, just a name and a date. It was enough. My family would believe it. After all, they never really knew me, did they? When the obituary went live, I left. I didn't look back. I boarded the plane with nothing but my passport, a few $100s, and the promise I'd made to myself. I was done being anyone's version of myself. I was going to start over. I had to. The first few months were bliss. I settled in a small town overseas, away from the life I had known. I found a job at a local cafe, something simple, something where no one would ask questions. I kept my head down, made a few friends, and slowly built a life for myself. It was nothing grand, but it was mine. I had my freedom. I could breathe. But even as I found peace in my new life, the guilt began to set in. It wasn't because I had faked my death. That was easy to justify. It was because I had abandoned the people who had made me feel worthless for so long. I had taken everything from them, and while I was free, they were left behind in their bubble of ignorance. My parents, my siblings, no one knew the truth. No one knew that I was alive. No one even knew that I had wanted to leave. But that guilt wasn't enough to make me return. I couldn't go back to the life they wanted for me. I couldn't live a lie for their comfort. And for years, I didn't even think about them. They were out of my life, and I was better for it. Then, one day, I got a message from an unknown number. It was my mother. She said she had been looking for me, had contacted everyone she could think of, and had even hired a private investigator to track me down. The message was simple but painful. We miss you. We need you back. Come home. I read the message, my stomach twisting with a mix of anger and hurt. They had finally noticed I was gone, but it wasn't because they cared. It was because they needed something from me. They wanted to use me again, to fulfill the role they had set for me all those years ago. But that was never going to happen. I put the phone down, a plan starting to form in my mind. I sat there staring at the phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. The message was still open, staring back at me like an accusation. We miss you. We need you back. Come home. My mother's words echoed in my head. For a moment, it felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, wondering whether I should go back, whether I should let them pull me into their world again. But then I remembered everything. The suffocation, the control, the endless pressure to live their lives for them. No, I wouldn't go back. But I couldn't just ignore them either. They had finally noticed I was gone, and while that should have been enough to make me feel vindicated, it didn't. The truth was, I wanted more than just their attention. I wanted them to understand the price of their neglect. I wanted them to feel the weight of their selfishness. The anger that had simmered inside me for so long started to rise again. This wasn't about my family missing me. This was about them realizing that they had failed me, that I had no obligation to them anymore. But they would never understand that unless I made them see it. So, I did the one thing I had sworn I would never do again. I decided to go back. But not as the person they once knew. No, I was going to return on my own terms. I was going to destroy everything they held dear, just as they had done to me for so long. This was no longer about reconciliation. It was about revenge. The plan started to form in my mind, piece by piece. The first thing I needed to do was to show them that I was alive, that I hadn't just disappeared forever. I wasn't going to make it easy on them. They needed to feel the shock, the surprise, and the betrayal. The same way I had when I realized they didn't care enough to even notice I was suffocating in their expectations. But I wasn't just going to reveal myself, show up, and have some heartfelt family reunion. No, that would be too easy. They had used me as a pawn for too long. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of thinking they could just pick up where they left off. I knew the one thing that would hurt them the most, the thing they cared about above all else, was their reputation. My family had always been obsessed with appearances. They cared about what people thought, how they looked to the outside world. I'd been the one to bear the brunt of their criticism, their shame, their need to control me. But now, it was time to flip the script. I started by reaching out to a few people I knew from my old life, old friends, acquaintances, even a few business contacts. I hadn't been completely isolated in my new life, and through the years, I'd built a network of people who owed me favors, or, at the very least, would be willing to help me with my plan. The first step was to gather information. I needed to know everything that was happening in my family's world. Their finances, their business deals, the way they presented themselves to the world. I needed to know what would hurt them the most, what would cause the most damage. As I gathered my intel, I found a few things that made my stomach churn. My family's business dealings were less than above board. My father's company, the one that had always been a source of pride for him, was built on lies, half-truths, and questionable ethics. There were tax loopholes they were exploiting, shady deals they had been involved in, and workers they had exploited for years. It was the perfect ammunition for someone who wanted to destroy them. And then there was my mother. I discovered that she had been hiding a few secrets of her own, affairs, gambling debts, and a lifestyle that she had tried to keep hidden from the world. The facade of the perfect family was nothing but smoke and mirrors. They were all pretending, and I was going to pull the curtain back and let the world see what they had really become. The next step was to make my return. I rented an apartment in the same city, right under their noses. I kept a low profile at first, making sure no one knew I was back. I needed to build the suspense, to let them wonder where I was, if I was really gone for good. I wanted them to believe I had truly disappeared, that they had lost me forever. And then, when the time was right, I made my move. I hired a private investigator, not to find me, but to plant evidence, make sure things were leaked at just the right time. The first piece of information was a scandalous one, a series of photos and documents detailing my family's business dealings. It was enough to raise questions, enough to get the ball rolling. I fed these to the media, anonymously, of course. Within days, the news hit. The company my father had built was under investigation for fraud. The press was all over it, asking questions my family didn't have answers for. And that was just the beginning. The next step was even more devastating. I anonymously sent the details of my mother's secrets to her closest friends, her social circle. The people who had supported her for years, who had believed in the perfect life she had built. The affair, the debts, the lies, everything. I knew they would turn on her, and I wanted to watch it unfold. I wanted to see the perfect facade she had spent years building come crashing down. As the media frenzy began to build and the whispers of scandal spread through their social circles, I watched from the shadows, a quiet observer of the chaos I had set into motion. My family was being torn apart, piece by piece, and I hadn't even revealed myself yet. But when I did, when they finally saw me again, it wouldn't be a reunion. It would be the final act in my revenge. I was going to make sure they understood that they had lost me forever, and that everything they had tried to control had slipped through their fingers. I was done being their puppet. I was done being the one who always gave in to their expectations. Now, it was time for them to pay the price for everything they had done. It didn't take long for everything to start falling apart. The media frenzy I'd set in motion was only the beginning. The story about my father's company began to gain traction. Investigations into his fraudulent business practices went public, and soon, it was all anyone could talk about. The family that had once been seen as pillars of the community was now under suspicion, and the whispers started to turn into accusations. I watched the chaos unfold from the comfort of my apartment, knowing that I was the one behind it all. But this wasn't just about the company. It was about everything they had taken from me. All those years of pressure, manipulation, and expectations were finally coming to light, and it felt good. Too good, perhaps. I had always played the role of the dutiful daughter, the obedient one. Now, they were finally seeing what happened when I wasn't around to follow their script. I had made sure to keep my distance, physically, emotionally, and digitally. I knew that if I resurfaced too soon, if they realized I was involved, it would lose the impact. No, I had to wait. Let everything unfold. Let them suffer. But then came the second part of my plan, the revelation of my mother's secrets. It was the perfect bombshell. The first leak was about my mother's affair with someone I didn't even know existed, David's old business partner, a man who had been part of our lives for years. I had enough proof, documents, pictures, everything, to make sure the news hit hard. Within hours of the leak, my mother's pristine public image crumbled. It was all over the tabloids. Affair revealed, socialite mother's double life exposed. The photos of her with another man, taken secretly during one of their meetings, were plastered everywhere. And the best part? My father had no idea. I could hear my mother's phone ringing off the hook. Calls from friends, from family, from people who had trusted her. People who now felt betrayed. She had built a life of lies, and now, she was going to have to face the consequences. But the real beauty of it wasn't just the affair. It was the financial ruin that came with it. I made sure the gambling debts my mother had been hiding came to light. I had collected every piece of information I could find. How much she owed, who she owed it to, and the fact that her reckless spending had been slowly draining my father's accounts. I didn't just destroy her reputation. I ensured she would have no way to rebuild it. I had to admit, I took some twisted pleasure in watching her slowly unravel. But I wasn't done yet. It was my father's turn now. I had waited long enough to make my final move, and it was time to pull the trigger. The once successful man who had built a fortune on lies and manipulation needed to be reminded of what he had lost. I arranged for a meeting with one of his business associates, someone he trusted, someone who had helped him build his empire. What my father didn't know was that this associate had been secretly on my side for months, feeding me information and making sure I had everything I needed for my revenge. The meeting was set. I had planned for everything. I arranged for a confidential meeting between my father and his associate, under the pretense of discussing the future of his business. But when the associate arrived, I made sure he brought with him a hard drive full of incriminating documents, proof of the business deals my father had made under the table, the tax evasion, the false reports. This was the final blow. I sat in the corner of the room, hidden from view, watching as my father sat across from his associate. The tension was palpable. The associate didn't waste time. He handed my father the drive, telling him that it was time to deal with the consequences of his actions. And then, just as planned, the associate left. I let my father sit there, confused and angry, as he tried to understand what was going on. But I knew he'd find out soon enough. The hard drive would lead to an audit, and that would open up a floodgate of problems. My father would lose everything. The empire he had worked so hard to build. The business would be exposed for what it was. And my mother's debts would make sure there was nothing left. It was poetic. The man who had controlled my life for so long was now going to lose everything because of the lies he had told to the world, to his family, to me. And it felt good. Too good. The next morning, I got the call. My father was frantic. The business was in crisis. He didn't know what was going on. The investigators were already at his office, digging into the company's finances. He demanded to know who had done this, but I didn't answer. He called again, and then again. But I knew the truth would hit him harder than anything I could say. The final touch was the social media campaign I launched to ensure the public knew everything. My family's dirty laundry was out in the open, and I wasn't going to let anyone forget who they really were. As the days went on, I saw the public backlash. People who had once admired my father now called him a fraud. My mother's affair became the talk of the town. Friends who had supported them now distanced themselves. The business associates who had once kissed my father's feet now turned their backs, unwilling to be associated with the shame he had brought upon himself. And I was watching it all from a distance, enjoying every moment. But I wasn't done yet. No, I wasn't just going to disappear and let them suffer the consequences of my revenge. I was going to be there, right in front of them, when they finally realized who had orchestrated their downfall. I was going to show them that I wasn't the helpless daughter they had thought they could control. I was going to look them in the eye and remind them that they had made me into the person who could destroy everything they loved. And when I did, they would know that this was my revenge. They would know that they had lost far more than just money or reputation. They had lost me, and that was the one thing they would never get back. I could hear it in their voices now, panic, desperation. The voices that once called out to me, demanding perfection, now sounded like echoes of the past. My father, once so powerful and confident, now sounded frail, defeated, trying to cling to a life he had built on lies. My mother, always so composed, her perfect image now shattered, her secrets exposed. They were losing everything, and for once, I felt like I had control. The media frenzy continued, the public humiliation grew, and the constant calls from family, friends, and business partners filled my phone. Everyone was demanding answers, but I wasn't there to offer them. I was the ghost who had come back to haunt them, and they were finally realizing the cost of their neglect. It was time. I had spent years plotting this, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal myself. I could have stayed in the shadows, enjoying my triumph. I could have let them drown in their guilt, their shame, and their financial ruin. But that wouldn't have been enough. No, I needed to look them in the eyes and let them know that I was the one who had brought this all down. The day I chose for the final confrontation was no accident. It was the day that my father's company was being investigated by the IRS. The day when his lies and tax evasion would become public knowledge. The day when my mother's secrets, her affairs and debts, would be exposed for all to see. I wanted them to know who was responsible for this downfall. I wanted them to understand the depth of their betrayal. I called my parents and set up a meeting at their house, under the guise of talking things through. I told them I had been keeping track of the developments and that I was willing to hear them out. I could feel their hope rising as they believed they could somehow fix things with me. They didn't know that their daughter had orchestrated everything. I arrived at their home, dressed in simple black, my appearance calm but purposefully detached. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me weak. My father met me at the door with a forced smile, his eyes still shadowed with panic. "Lily," he said, trying to sound composed, but his voice cracked. "Thank you for coming. We need to talk. There's so much we need to explain." I nodded slowly, stepping inside. My mother was sitting in the living room, her face pale, eyes filled with a mix of guilt and fear. She didn't even look at me, but I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. I couldn't suppress the anger that had been building in me for so long. "Explain?" I asked, my voice icy. "Explain what exactly?" "How you and David ruined my life. How you thought you could manipulate me into living your perfect little version of reality." They both stiffened at the mention of David. My father took a step toward me, his voice defensive. "Lily, please, you don't understand. I've made mistakes, but everything I did was for you, for the family. I never meant for any of this to happen." My mother looked up then, her voice trembling. "We were just trying to protect you. We wanted the best for you, but you didn't see that. We didn't know how to help you." I could feel the tears welling up in my own eyes, but they weren't from sorrow. They were from a deep, burning rage. "You never understood me. You never cared about what I wanted. You only cared about what you needed from me. Your perfect image, your perfect family. I was never a person to you. I was just a tool to make your lives easier. Well, guess what? I'm not your puppet anymore." My father's face fell, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But it was too little, too late. They didn't deserve my forgiveness. They didn't deserve to have me back in their lives. And I wasn't going to let them get away with what they had done. I took a deep breath and said the words that had been building inside me for years. "I faked my death because I had to. I had to escape from you both. I had to be free from your suffocating expectations. And you know what? It was the best thing I've ever done." I watched as the shock washed over their faces, the realization that their perfect world had been shattered. My father looked at my mother, his mouth opening to say something, but no words came out. It was too late. The truth was out there, and they had to face the consequences. "You think you can just apologize and make everything go away?" I continued. "You think I'm going to come back and pick up the pieces of your broken lives? You've already destroyed everything. Your company, your reputation, your marriage, everything is gone, and I'm the one who made sure it happened." They stared at me, stunned and speechless. I could feel the weight of their guilt pressing down on them. But I wasn't done. "Do you know what the best part is?" I asked, my voice steady but full of cold satisfaction. "It's that you'll never be able to fix this. You'll never get back the things you took from me, the years of my life that I'll never get back. And now, you'll spend the rest of your lives dealing with the consequences of your actions. This is my revenge, and you're going to have to live with it." My father's eyes narrowed, his voice barely audible. "You're wrong, Lily. You don't know what you're talking about. This won't last. We'll fix this." I shook my head. "No, Dad. It's over. The truth is out. You can't hide anymore. And I'm done with you." I turned on my heel and walked out of their house without looking back. The months that followed were a whirlwind. My father's business went under, his reputation in tatters. My mother's affairs became the subject of gossip and scandal. They had nowhere to turn, and everyone they had once relied on turned their backs on them. The world they had built was crumbling, and they were powerless to stop it. And me? I went on with my life, free from the chains they had tried to bind me with. My name was no longer a whisper of shame. It was a symbol of freedom. I had exacted my revenge, not with violence or threats, but with truth, patience, and careful planning. In the end, They realized that their biggest mistake was not abandoning me. It was thinking they could control me. They couldn't. And now, I was living the life I had always deserved. And I had taken everything they loved to get it.